Okay, so picture this. It's a Saturday night in Swindon, England. The lights are flashing, music's pulsing, and you've got two young women out with their friends, just, enjoying a typical Saturday night.
Right.
But by morning, one of them, Cian O'Callaghan, is gone, vanished without a trace.
It's every family's worst nightmare. The not knowing the uncertainty, it can be just absolutely agonizing.
And in this case, it's a disappearance that ended up uncovering this chilling connection to a cold case
Yeah.
that had actually haunted the town for years.
Yeah, and it's a story that really does unfold like a true crime thriller. So many twists and turns. I mean, it really raises questions about justice and police procedure, and I think it really gives us a glimpse into kind of that dark side of human nature that I think exists in every community.
Oh, absolutely. And today we're going to dive deep into those twisting paths. And we've got a mix of sources that help us paint a really vivid picture of what happened. Court documents, news reports from The Guardian, and even a documentary that follows the investigation step by step.
Yeah, the documentary is fantastic, very in-depth.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as always, you, our listener, are here with us. We're piecing together the puzzle.
That's right. And I think what makes this deep dive particularly compelling is that human element at its core. We're going to hear directly from the families of both women. We'll feel their anguish, their determination, and, that incredible fight for justice against really, seemingly impossible odds.
Okay, so let's start with Cian O'Callaghan. It's 2011. She's 22 years old, and she's out for a fun night at this club called Suju. And it was supposed to be, just a regular Saturday, end the night with a short walk home. She lived only half a mile from the club.
Yeah, and you can almost picture it, right? I mean, the energy of the crowd, the music, that sense of freedom that you get when you're out with your friends. It's a feeling so many of us can relate to, which I think makes Cian's disappearance all the more frightening.
Oh, absolutely. It hits close to home. And what's so heartbreaking is that her boyfriend, Kevin Reap, knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. He was out with friends that night, too. And when Cian didn't come home, he didn't wait. He started calling hospitals, alerted the police, contacted Cian's family, and was desperately trying to retrace her steps.
It really speaks to their close bond. He had that gut feeling that something wasn't right.
Absolutely.
And it's such a contrast to the police response when we look at another young woman's disappearance 8 years earlier in 2003. Becky Godden Edwards, she also vanished after a night out, last seen getting into a taxi, and despite her family's pleas, her case was never fully investigated.
It's just tragic.
Yeah.
And it really reflects a bias that often surfaces in these cases involving sex workers. It's like their lives are deemed less worthy of investigation. It's a deeply troubling societal issue.
Oh, absolutely. And that bias undoubtedly hampered the search for Becky for years. It delayed justice and just compounded the grief of her loved ones.
Now, with Cian's case, the police, led by Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, they didn't waste any time. They quickly identified a green Toyota taxi that was connected to her disappearance. They used CCTV footage and even images from a passing police car's ANPR cameras to track down the driver, Christopher Halliwell.
This is where the investigation takes a controversial turn. Instead of immediately arresting Halliwell, Fulcher decides to keep him under surveillance, hoping he'd lead them to Cian while she was potentially still alive.
Oh, wow.
It was a gamble.
Yeah.
A real race against time in the hopes of saving her life.
So what did they find during that surveillance?
Well, they observed Halliwell cleaning his car meticulously, like really going over it, disposing of seat covers, even purchasing a very large quantity of pills.
Wow, that's suspicious.
Yeah.
So many red flags.
Yeah, and driven by his gut instinct and just the urgency of the situation, Fulcher makes a risky decision. He intersects Halliwell before he could be taken to the station, essentially denying him access to a lawyer at that point.
He broke protocol.
Yeah, hoping to appeal to Halliwell's conscience, urging him to do the right thing for Cian. And incredibly, it seemed to work. Halliwell confessed to murdering Cian and led Fulcher to her body in a remote area called Savernake Forest.
Wow. But this confession was later ruled inadmissible in court because Fulcher violated the PACE Act, which is the UK's strict guidelines for handling suspects.
Right, and that's the dilemma, isn't it? So while Halliwell was ultimately convicted of Cian's murder, the legality of the confession sparked a huge debate. Police powers versus individual rights, a real moral and legal tightrope walk. There's no easy answers.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah.
Do you prioritize potentially saving a life, or do you follow procedure?
Exactly. It's a tough call. And this case gets even more complicated because during that car ride with Fulcher, Halliwell just drops this other bombshell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He points out this completely different location and confesses to another murder, a sex worker that he claimed to have killed years earlier. And that victim was later identified as Becky Godden Edwards, the young woman whose disappearance had been largely forgotten by the authorities.
It's just a chilling reminder that for every case that gets solved, there are probably others that are lurking in the shadows,
Yeah.
especially when the victims are, those that society tends to overlook.
Absolutely. And Becky's case, initially weakened by that inadmissible confession, becomes this testament to the tenacity of her family. They refuse to let her memory fade. They push for a new investigation. And in 2014, a new detective takes on the challenge.
So at this point, they can't rely on Halliwell's words anymore.
Right. They have to build the case completely from scratch, painstakingly piecing together circumstantial evidence.
That must have been so difficult.
It was.
Yeah.
But imagine the dedication of these investigators. They found soil on a shovel, and it matched the soil at Becky's burial site.
Oh, wow.
And they even uncovered evidence of injuries that Halliwell had sustained around the time of her disappearance. Injuries that he had previously attributed to this made-up attack by a passenger.
It's like a puzzle slowly taking shape.
Exactly.
Over years, driven by the love of Becky's family and the determination of those who believed that justice could still be served.
Right. And remember, this whole time, Halliwell is already serving a life sentence for Cian's murder. But the fight for Becky, it continues.
It's a long road. And speaking of a long road to justice, we have to talk about those 60 pieces of women's clothing that were found in a pond.
Yeah, that discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. And then Halliwell himself made this chilling offer to the police. He said he'd accept responsibility for Becky's murder if they agreed to stop asking him about any other potential crimes.
Wait a minute. So he was bargaining with the police,
Yeah.
trying to silence them about
Yeah.
other possible victims?
It certainly seems that way. And I mean, it points to a pattern of behavior and suggests that there could be a web of victims far larger than anyone initially suspected.
So despite all of the complications with this case, did they manage to get a conviction for Becky's murder?
They did. In 2016, after years of tireless efforts by investigators and Becky's family, Christopher Halliwell was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
It's a victory, but it comes with a haunting question. How many other victims are out there? I mean, that trophy store of clothing hints at, a level of predatory behavior that's just terrifying.
It really is a chilling thought, and it's one that continues to haunt investigators and, of course, the families of the victims.
It's in these darkest moments, I think, that the strength of the human spirit can really shine through.
Yeah.
Both Cian and Becky's families chose to channel their grief into action and became advocates for a change.
It's remarkable.
It is.
Cian's mother, Elaine, campaigned tirelessly for stricter taxi regulations, which led to Cian's Law, which is a huge step towards ensuring the safety of passengers. And Becky's mother, Karen, she continues to fight for greater flexibility in Pacey laws. She argues that prioritizing a suspect's rights over a potential victim's life can have just these devastating consequences.
It's truly remarkable how they took their personal pain and turned it into a force for good, working tirelessly to prevent other families from enduring the same heartache.
It is really inspiring.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that even in the face of just unimaginable loss, we have the power to choose how we respond. We can let the darkness consume us, or we can fight for change, for a better future.
Absolutely. And, their strength and their resilience, it's a real beacon of hope. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure and even inspire others.
Yeah, Elaine and Karen, they refused to be silenced. They used their voices to demand accountability and push for a safer world and ultimately to honor the memories of their daughters.
And that's what I think makes this deep dive so powerful. It's not just a story about crime and punishment. It's a story about the human spirit and its ability to persevere, to fight for justice, and to create positive change, even in the face of just unimaginable tragedy.
And it brings us back to you, our listener. What resonates with you most from these stories of loss and justice and resilience? What would you take away from this deep dive into the heart of Swindon?
These cases, I think they really challenge us to think about our own roles in creating a safer, more just world. How can we support the vulnerable? How can we hold those in power accountable?
It's a call to action for all of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more engaged in shaping a world where tragedies like these become a thing of the past.
So as you move forward from this deep dive, I want you to consider, what even small step can you take? What action can you contribute to bring us closer to that vision? The answer and its impact might surprise you.
It really might. And that wraps up our deep dive into the disappearances of Cyrano Callahan and Becky Godden Edwards. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, stay curious.